A pattern has repeated in the confessional for decades, and most Catholics have never stopped to notice it. Certain sins are confessed with vague, almost coded words, as if saying the exact name of the problem were worse than the sin itself. I had impure thoughts. I slipped up. I was unfaithful in one way, but not that way. Phrases like these pass through the confessional every day, and they serve a silent function. They protect the penitent from facing the real weight of what they carry. Have you ever noticed this in yourself? Have you ever walked out of confession feeling like you said something, but not the right thing? That feeling isn't an accident. There are sins that even practicing Catholics avoid naming precisely, not because they don't know them, but because naming them requires admitting something they'd rather not admit. About a habit, about a marriage, about an old choice that was never truly closed before God. In this video, we're going to name 4 of these sins with the clarity the confessional demands. Each one is avoided for a different reason: shame, habit, self-image, fear of judgment. And each one has a concrete answer in church doctrine, not personal opinion. If you're a practicing Catholic, it's quite likely that at least one of these 4 points touches on something you've already thought but never said out loud. Before we continue, hit like and subscribe to the channel. It helps this video reach other Catholics who also need to hear what comes next. The first of these sins is pornography and masturbation. And here, it's worth correcting a common misunderstanding. Many people treat this as a weightless slip, almost a detail in confession, something resolved by saying, "I had impure thoughts," and moving on. The Catechism of the Catholic Church does not treat the matter this way. It classifies these acts as intrinsically and gravely disordered, precisely because they disconnect sexual pleasure from the purpose for which God created it, the mutual self-gift between spouses, open to life. Why does this matter so much? Because the objective gravity of an act, according to the Catechism itself, can be diminished by affective immaturity, by habits acquired in situations of distress, or by other psychological factors. But diminishing personal responsibility is not the same as denying the gravity of the act itself. And that's exactly the distinction most people ignore. They use the mitigation as an excuse, never to truly examine the habit. Here's the question many Catholics have asked themselves, but never had the courage to bring to the priest. If I confess this every week and fall again, does that mean confession isn't working? No. It means the sin hasn't yet been named with enough honesty for sacramental grace to reach its root. Saying I had impure thoughts describes a temptation. Saying I used pornography X times this week in context Y describes a behavior. And it's the behavior, not the isolated thought, that needs to be confronted with clarity in the confessional. It's in the silence about frequency, context, and repetition that the habit keeps its power over the person. The second sin that rarely reaches the confessional with honesty is the use of contraceptive methods within marriage. And this one is interesting because, unlike pornography, there's no shame involved here. There is, in most cases, a genuine conviction that this isn't even a sin. Many Catholic couples treat contraception as a purely practical family planning decision, and they never bring it to confession because they simply don't perceive it as matter for examination of conscience. But the Church's teaching on this is not ambiguous, and it's not recent. In 1968, Pope Paul VI published the encyclical Humanae Vitae, reaffirming something the Church had already taught for centuries. The conjugal act has 2 meanings that are inseparable by God's design, the unitive and the procreative. Separating these 2 meanings on purpose, through a method that artificially blocks fertilization, is to refuse one of the central purposes God established for marriage. Here's a question many Catholic couples avoid asking out loud. Is there a difference between family planning and contraception? Yes, and that difference is real, not merely semantic. The Church doesn't require couples to have the greatest possible number of children with no planning at all. Natural methods of fertility regulation, which respect a woman's biological cycles without artificially blocking fertility, are recognized by the Church itself as morally licit, provided they're motivated by just reasons. The difference isn't in wanting or not wanting children right now. It's in how the couple arrives at that decision, cooperating with the body's own design or technically overriding it. And this is exactly where the discomfort lives. Recognizing this as sin means admitting that a common, silent practice present in many Catholic homes was never brought to confession because it was never seen as something to confess. It's not a lack of courage as in the first case, it's a lack of examination. The third sin demands an uncomfortable question. Does adultery only happen when there's a consummated physical act? Jesus answers this directly in the Gospel of Matthew, teaching that whoever looks at a woman with lust has already committed adultery with her in his heart. This statement shifts the center of the sin from the act to the intention, from the body to the heart. And that's exactly what most Catholics avoid examining. There's a gray zone many people know well but rarely name in confession. Flirting disguised as friendship, the conversation that wouldn't be shown to one's spouse without embarrassment, the message deleted out of caution, the emotional bond that grows in secret even without any physical contact. None of this gets confessed as adultery because, technically, nothing happened. But Jesus had already answered that objection before it was even raised. The sin began the moment the heart chose to make room for something that belonged exclusively to the spouse. Why is this so avoided in confession? Because recognizing this gray zone means admitting that fidelity was already compromised before any concrete proof. And that confronts the self-image of, I never cheated on my spouse, that many people prefer to keep intact. It's easier to say, I had a friendship that maybe crossed a line, than to say, I hid this relationship because I knew it wounded my marriage. The second sentence names the sin. The first dissolves it into ambiguity. It's worth noting that the Catechism treats conjugal fidelity as a requirement of justice, not merely of sentiment. The spouse has a right to the exclusivity of the other's heart, not just their body. And it's precisely this right that adultery of the heart already violates, even when no physical line is crossed. We arrive at the fourth sin, and it is by far the most avoided of the four. Abortion carries an emotional weight that none of the other three carry in the same way, because it involves pain, fear of judgment, and, in many cases, decades of silence carried alone. Here, it's important to correct something many Catholics assume incorrectly. Participation in an abortion isn't limited to whoever performs the procedure. The Catechism is clear that formal cooperation in an abortion constitutes a grave offense. This includes whoever advises, whoever pressures, whoever finances, whoever transports, whoever provides logistical support, knowing its purpose, and also whoever, being able to intervene or speak up, chooses complicit silence in the face of another person's decision. The gravity isn't restricted to the physical act. It extends to the whole chain of conscious cooperation. Why is this the sin most hidden behind vague phrases? Because the pain is real and the fear of judgment is real. Many people carry this weight alone for years, believing the Church would treat them harshly if the truth were spoken plainly in the confessional. But here's something that needs to be said clearly. The Church does maintain serious canonical penalties tied to this sin. The automatic excommunication set out in canon law is real, but Pope Francis himself, following a practice already granted by his predecessors, authorized all priests to absolve this sin in the sacrament of confession without needing special authorization from a bishop. This means that no Catholic who approaches the confessional seeking reconciliation for this specific sin is turned away because of canonical excommunication. The Church did exactly the opposite of what fear whispers. It opened the door, not closed it. This changes the question many have asked themselves but never put into words. Is there a sin too big for confession? No, and it's precisely in the face of the sin that provokes the most fear of judgment that this truth needs to be said without mincing words. These four sins have something in common. They are exactly the ones that cost the most to say out loud, by their proper name, without disguise. This is exactly where confession reveals its true depth. It isn't hard to confess a sin that no longer bothers anyone to say. What takes courage, and what actually leads to spiritual healing, is naming what truly weighs on you, without trading it for a more comfortable version of the same sin. God's mercy wasn't established for the sins that are easy to admit. It was established above all for those that require courage to speak before Him, through the priest who stands in the place of Christ in the confessional. If any of these four sins touched on something you'd been avoiding saying clearly, This is the only answer that matters. It isn't excommunication that separates you from mercy, it's silence. And silence, unlike the sin itself, can be broken at your next confession. If this video helped you see more clearly what needs to be said in the confessional, hit like and subscribe to the channel so other Catholics can find that same clarity too.